The day had begun to smile cheerily, and the sun was already gilding the tops of the hills, when a band of men, in arms and appearance pirates, having ascended the summit of a mountain which stretches down towards the Heracleotic mouth of the Nile, paused and contemplated the sea which was expanded before them. When not a sail appeared on the water to give them hopes of a booty, they cast their eyes upon the neighboring shore, where the scene was as follows. A ship was riding at anchor, abandoned by her crew, but to all appearance laden with merchandise, as she drew much water. The beach was strewn with bodies newly slaughtered, some quite dead, others dying yet still breathing, gave signs of a combat recently ended. Yet it appeared not to have been a designed engagement, but there were mingled with these dreadful spectacles the fragments of an unlucky feast, which seemed to have concluded in this fatal manner. There were tables, some yet spread with eatables, others overturned upon those who had hoped to hide themselves under them, others grasped by hands which had snatched them up as weapons. Cups lay in disorder, half fallen out of the hands of those who had been drinking from them, or which had been flung instead of missiles, for the suddenness of the affray had converted goblets into weapons. Here lay one wounded with an axe, another bruised by a shell picked up on the beach, a third had his limbs broken with a billet, a fourth was burnt with a torch, but the greater part were transfixed with arrows. In short, the strangest contrast was exhibited within the shortest compass. Wine mingled by fate with blood, war with feasting, drinking and fighting, libations and slaughters. Such was the scene that presented itself to the eyes of the pirates. They gazed some time, puzzled and astonished. The vanquished lay dead before them, but they nowhere saw the conquerors. The victory was plain enough, but the spoils were not taken away. The ship rode quietly at anchor, though with no one on board, yet unpillaged, as much as if it had been defended by a numerous crew, and as if all had been peace. They soon, however, gave up conjecturing, and began to think of plunder, and constituting themselves victors, advanced to seize the prey. But as they came near the ship and the field of slaughter, a spectacle presented itself which perplexed them more than any which they had yet seen. A maiden of uncommon and almost heavenly beauty sat upon a rock. She seemed deeply afflicted at the scene before her, but amidst that affliction preserved an air of dignity. Her head was crowned with laurel, she had a quiver at her shoulder. Under her left arm was a bow, the other hung negligently down. She rested her left elbow on her right knee, and leaning her cheek on her open hand, looked earnestly down on a youth, who lay upon the ground at some distance. He, wounded all over, seemed to be recovering a little from a deep and almost deadly trance. Yet even in this situation he appeared of manly beauty, and the whiteness of his cheeks became more conspicuous from the blood which flowed upon them. Pain had depressed his eyelids, yet with difficulty he raised them towards the maiden, and collecting his spirits, in a languid voice thus addressed her, while the pirates were still gazing upon both. "My love, are you indeed alive? Or has the rage of war involved you also in its miseries? But you cannot bear even in death to be entirely separated from me, for your spirit still hovers round me and my fortunes." "My fate," replied the maiden, "depends on thee. Dost thou see this?" showing him a dagger which lay on her knee. "It has been idle because thou still breathedst." And saying this, she sprang from the rock. The pirates upon the mountain, struck with wonder and admiration, as by a sudden flash of lightning, began to hide themselves among the bushes, for at her rising she appeared still greater and more divine. Her shafts rattled as she moved, her gold-embroidered garments glittered in the sun, and her hair flowed from under her laurel diadem in disheveled ringlets down her neck. The pirates, alarmed and confused, were totally at a loss to account for this appearance, which puzzled them more than the previous spectacle. Some said it was the goddess Diana, or Isis, the tutelary deity of the country. Others that it was some priestess, who, inspired by a divine frenzy from the gods, had caused the slaughter they beheld. This they said at random, still in ignorance and doubt. She, flying towards the youth and embracing him, wept, kissed him, wiped off the blood, fetched a deep sigh, and seemed as if she could yet scarcely believe she had him in her arms. The Egyptians, observing this, began to change their opinion. These, said they, are not the actions of a deity. A goddess would not with so much affection kiss a dying body. They encouraged one another, therefore, to go nearer, and to inquire into the real state of things. Collecting themselves together then, they ran down and reached the maiden, as she was busied about the wounds of the youth, and placing themselves behind her, made a stand, not daring to say or do anything. But she, startled at the noise they made and the shadow they cast, raised herself up, and just looking at them, again bent down, not in the least terrified at their unusual complexion and piratical appearance, but earnestly applied herself to the care of the wounded youth. So totally does vehement affection and sincere love overlook or disregard whatever happens from without, be it pleasing or terrifying, and confines and employs every faculty, both of soul and body, to the beloved object. But when the pirates advancing stood in front, and seemed preparing to seize her, she raised herself again, and seeing their dark complexion and rugged looks, "If you are the shades of the slain," said she, "why do you trouble me? Most of you fell by each other's hands. If any died by mine, it was in just defense of my endangered chastity. But if you are living men, it appears to me that you are pirates. You come very opportunely to free me from my misfortunes, and to finish my unhappy story by my death." Thus she spake in tragic strain. They, not understanding what she said, and from the weak condition of the youth, being under no apprehension of their escaping, left them as they were, and proceeding to the ship, began to unload it. It was full of various merchandise, but they cared for nothing but the gold, silver, precious stones, and silken garments, of all which articles they carried away as much as they were able. When they thought they had enough, and they found sufficient even to satisfy the avidity of pirates, placing their booty on the shore, they divided it into portions, not according to value but to weight, intending to make what related to the maiden and the youth matter of their next consideration. At this instant another band of plunderers appeared, led by 2 men on horseback, which as soon as the first party observed, they fled precipitately away, leaving their booty behind them lest they should be pursued, for they were but 10, whereas those who came down upon them were at least twice as many. The maiden in this manner ran a second risk of being taken captive. The pirates, hastening to their prey, yet from surprise and ignorance of the facts, stopped a little. They concluded the slaughter they saw to have been the work of the first robbers, but seeing the maid in a foreign and magnificent dress, little affected by the alarming circumstances which surrounded her, employing her whole attention about the wounded youth, and seeming to feel his pains as if they were her own, they were much struck with her beauty and greatness of mind. They viewed with wonder, too, the noble form and stature of the young man, who now began to recover himself a little, and to assume his usual countenance. After some time, the leader of the band advancing, laid hands upon the maiden, and ordered her to arise and follow him. She, not understanding his language, yet guessing at his meaning, drew the youth after her, who still kept hold of her, and pointing to a dagger at her bosom, made signs that she would stab herself unless they took both away together. The captain, comprehending what she meant, and promising himself a valuable addition to his troop and the youth, if he should recover, dismounted from his horse, and making his lieutenant dismount too, put the prisoners upon their horses, and ordered the rest to follow when they had collected the booty. He himself walked by their side, ready to support them, in case they should be in danger of falling. There was something noble in this, a commander appearing to serve, and a victor waiting upon his captives. Such is the power of native dignity and beauty, that it can even impose upon the mind of a pirate and subdue the fiercest of men. They traveled about 2 furlongs along the shore. Then, leaving the sea on their right hand, they turned towards the mountains, and with some difficulty ascending them, they arrived at a kind of morass, which extended on the other side. The features of the place were these. The whole tract is called the pasturage by the Egyptians. In it there is a valley, which receives certain overflowings of the Nile and forms a lake, the depth of which in the center is unfathomable. On the sides it shoals into a marsh, for as the shore is to the sea, such are marshes to lakes. Here the Egyptian pirates have their quarters. One builds a sort of hut upon a bit of ground which appears above the water. Another spends his life on board a vessel, which serves him at once for transport and habitation. Here their wives work for them and bring forth their children, who at first are nourished with their mother's milk, and afterwards with fish dried in the sun. When they begin to crawl about, they tie a string to their ankles, and suffer them to go the length of the boat. Thus this inhabitant of the pasturage is born upon the lake, is raised in this manner, and considers this morass as his country, affording as it does shelter and protection for his piracy. Men of this description, therefore, are continually flocking thither. The water serves them as a citadel, and the quantity of reeds as a fortification. Having cut oblique channels among these with many windings easy to themselves, but very difficult for others, they imagined themselves secure from any sudden invasion. Such was the situation of the lake and its inhabitants. Here, about sunset, the pirate chief and his followers arrived. They made their prisoners dismount and disposed of the booty in their boats. A crowd of others who had remained at home, appearing out of the morass, ran to meet them and received the chief as if he had been their king. And seeing the quantity of spoils and almost divine beauty of the maiden, imagined that their companions had been pillaging some temple and had brought away its priestess, or perhaps the breathing image of the deity herself. They praised the valor of their captain and conducted him to his quarters. These were in a little island at a distance from the rest, set apart for himself and his few attendants. When they arrived, he dismissed the greater part, ordering them to assemble there again on the morrow, and then taking a short repast with the few who remained, he delivered his captives to a young Greek, whom he had not long before taken to serve as an interpreter, assigning them a part of his own hut for their habitation, giving strict orders that the wounded youth should have all possible care taken of him, and the maiden be treated with the utmost respect. And then, fatigued with his expedition, and the weight of cares which lay upon him, he betook himself to rest.